we'd like to take a few minutes here, and I'm going to pose one or two questions to the audience, but also we have a few young ladies here who have a microphone, and if you've got a question for anybody here who's presented today, or just a general question as well, please feel free to go right ahead. I'm actually going to pose a question to someone who's not here at this panel right away. I'm going to pose a question to Diana Cooper, if I may, who's a member of our steering committee. And Diana works for the global operation Godolphin, as most of us here know. And what was mentioned today was responsible ownership. And would like to learn your point of view on how equine welfare aftercare is a component of responsible ownership, and what a takeaway message might be for owners all around the world.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'd like actually to thank everybody here. As a representative of Godolphin, the reason that we helped instigate IFAR was because we felt that Thoroughbred aftercare was an element of the actual business of the industry that hadn't been addressed sufficiently. I look forward to talking about what's happened here today with our managing directors around the world, because I cannot get over the vast improvement from all our colleagues, everybody who's been working on this in the space for so long. I'd actually I know we're really short of time, but I want to say one thing too on a personal front. Having had the joy of a lifetime working in racing, I have kind of across the years picked up the odd little hair of a horse myself. And in each of these jurisdictions, I hold my hand up to say that I've very seldom actually put my name to, I've been asked to put my name to any of the forms that you're talking about. I have asked several jurisdictions, what can I do when my horse retires? France, unbelievable now, Au-delà des Pistes has revolutionized what's happened there. I hope our young lady won't have to be part of it, but when she does retire, that'll be good. Ireland, things are moving forward. I'm very lucky I've got a horse now that's teaching young jockeys how to ride at the racing academy there. But seeing Simon's passport for a horse, I find it absolutely extraordinary still. And this is going back to the mid-80s when I worked for a trainer in Newmarket. The fact that the horse's owner doesn't feature anywhere on that passport, I find extraordinary, and yet I'm delighted with the e-passport that the owner is actually going to feature on the main page. I think it's something that is so outdated now. Roly, thank you for your thoughts about euthanasia. End of life is something that we're all dreading, both personally and for our equine friends, and talking about it helps in every single way. I won't go on, but thank you all very much. I feel much more reassured both personally and professionally, and we'll pass that back to, as I say, our colleagues at Godolphin. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment and pose a question, if I could, to our chair, Di. Today we acknowledge that the equestrian industry is an important avenue for receiving a large number of retired racehorses for countries that may not have an established equestrian sector, or a sector that's very limited. What advice might you suggest that could be done to establish those inroads and to help develop an industry that our retired racehorses then could be drawn to?
I think through some of our presentations today that we've heard a couple of avenues, and certainly therapies come through 2 or 3 of the presentations. And I think that's something that we've found at home that a lot of organizations are using, that they are using thoroughbreds for various work with children and for veterans and other parts of therapy. And I think there's perhaps also opportunities that some of these countries could perhaps form maybe clubs or sort of riding clubs for these horses that are simply for thoroughbreds, that it became a bit of a community network.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Di. I've got one more question, and then we'll open it up here to the audience. And this one actually is for Roly, for down there at the end. Your presentation, we cited euthanasia. In a number of countries around the world, abattoirs, knackeries are legal avenues and options. But what measures really need to be taken place, what regulations are necessary, and what measures of accountability to ensure that when euthanasia does take place, it's both humane and a dignified end of life.
Thank you, Andrew. There are very well-recognized standards for euthanasia of equines. I mentioned the OIE standard, and it's important to have slaughterhouses where the horses are slaughtered for human consumption that comply with those regulations. And horses obviously are unique in the sense of the type of animals they are, so they cannot simply be slaughtered in an abattoir that takes cattle, for example, because it's really important, for example, that a horse does not see another horse being slaughtered, because the stress that will put them through is significant. So I think it's making sure you have the regulation, but I think it was Jen who said about traceability, and you know, one of the Australian lessons was the fact that they had a traceability sort of regulation that wasn't enforced. I think you can think of any regulation. If you don't enforce it, then don't bother having a regulation. And I think that is the key thing here. It's so easy to sort of pick on what you think is the wrong thing. And of course, many people will have viewed the ABC program and very similar programs and say it's completely wrong for a horse to be slaughtered. That, we do not believe, is the right conclusion. It is completely wrong for a horse to be inhumanely slaughtered.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'd like to open it up to the audience here. We have a few young ladies here who have a microphone. If somebody has a question, just raise your hand. Finn, please.
I'd like to send the accolades to the board, particularly, and Dolly Cooper for initiating the principle in the first place. But I just wonder, with the number of horses that retire in any major racing area, and given that the retiree is probably going to live till he's 20 if he's well looked after, what is the IFAR's strategy related to the future? That's the first point. The second question I was wondering if I could pose to Jen Hughes related to the non-commercial mare in the stud farm that hasn't produced a commercial foal within the last, say, 5 seasons, and she's theoretically isn't much of an equestrian proposition. What's the strategy for those?
Maybe we can ask Jen to answer that second question there, and then Elliot, if you wanted to grab on to the first.
Okay. In relation to broodmares, I think that relates to any horse that falls in that category D that has no or limited equestrian prospects. That's the most challenging area, and I don't think we actually have the answer. We're working with the breeding industry just now to figure out what those numbers are and trying to, I think, get creative with it. There is a responsibility for people who have owned and bred from these horses to pay for retirement themselves. We can also get creative about finding options for them. We're even looking at having sponsored competitions for horses that have been brood mares to try and encourage that element of it. There isn't a straightforward answer for those horses, and that's what our strategy is acknowledging, that there are horses that fall outside of the desirability categories, and you want to make sure that you've got something in place for them. We don't know how big that number is, and that's where we haven't got a solid solution for it. The idea being that in 12 months' time, we'll know, is that 30% of the horses coming out of racing, or is it 2% of the horses coming out of the racing? Because depending on the numbers, it's a very different solution. Probably not the exact answer you wanted, but that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Right, Finn, I think if I understand the question earlier, you're alluding to the fact that whatever we're doing, the challenge is still enormous, just with the numbers, and perhaps as if we're successful, there probably will be more horses in the community that need to be cared for. So I guess one of the things that I guess we're feeling all around the room is that we all agree that something needs to be done. There have been activist challenges in some country that have led in some cases to quite some catastrophic events in terms of the reputation of the industry. So we all agree that something has to be done. There's a real danger that as we think about strategies and we think about ideas, that we say, well, that won't work, and well, you know, if you do that, then what are you going to do about with all these other things? And part of our key message here is that you've got to start somewhere. And if we are successful, then in all inevitability, there will be increased numbers of horses in the community. And we don't have to solve for that today, but we've got to start the journey. It was Jack Welch who said, do something, do anything. And I think that that is the thing, that we don't want to be caught napping when the media or the activists come knocking and say, well, listen, we've always planned to do something. Oh, we had some ideas about it. Well, you've got to, the rubber's got to hit the road. There's got to be funding that's dedicated. There's got to be strategies put in place. There's got to be rules that are approved, and there have got to be compliance strategies associated with those rules, as Riley just highlighted. So what it all means out there, we don't have all the answers, but if we're successful, let's solve those problems, and hopefully there'll be bigger problems in relation to those numbers when we get this basic stuff right in the first instance.
No, thank you, Elliot. I think you're totally correct. And as we had an example here today, in Japan and Korea, in just a relative short amount of time, you can really make a difference. And I fully expect at our next IFAR forum that there'll be a number of other countries that can come to us and say, well, we've made these inroads and address these challenges. So it can be done. Are there any other questions then from the audience? Do we have one? Which direction? I'm sorry, I can't quite see. I've got one just right here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. It's a question for Simon, and his answer may well be, how long's a piece of string? And you made reference to it on a couple of occasions in your presentation. How difficult, Simon, is the Brexit decision likely to be in trying to implement the passport system that you outlined so well today?
Well, currently we don't actually know what's going to happen through the negotiations, and it'll be one of those, it'll come down to the wire. So, you know, come December the 30th, 2020, we still might not have an answer, but hopefully we will. How will it impact the movement? You might remember there was a circle, a sort of multicolored circle. So effectively, we will have to pre-clear horses before they travel. Now, the complication we've got is that there is a lot of movement, probably the largest, in terms of thoroughbreds, I can only speak on behalf of thoroughbreds, the largest movement of horses between any two countries across an international border, which is Ireland and Britain. Over 10,000 thoroughbreds move between the two each year. So whatever solution we come up with will have to take into account a huge amount of movement. On top of that, you've got horses going from and to France and Ireland, and they currently go, we are a land bridge, which makes life quite complicated. Now, originally, there was a suggestion that we can solve that because we just simply seal the containers. I'm not sure that was the greatest idea, but that actually was suggested, believe it or not. But what we really want to do is have, going back to that multicolored circle on the slide, is have a process where the verification goes digitally to the government. So the vet effectively clears the horse for pre-clearance notification. That information goes directly to the government authority that then gives the okay, and I'm simplifying this enormously, but you'll see those 7 steps on the slide. But the government then gives that clearance. It's then assigned to a consignment, and then the horse can effectively travel. At the moment, there's a lot of paper involved. I think somebody else said there's a huge amount of paper when horses move. And there's several, not only government requirements, health and welfare requirements, but there's also inter-racing requirements, export certificates, and so on. And depending on whether the horse is simply going from one country to another or then going on, transiting to another country, depends on what form you fill in. So it's getting quite complicated. In April so it's a very long answer to your very simple question, but it's quite a complicated issue. In April 2021, the new animal health law will be enacted in Europe. Now, we being Britain, will need to effectively comply with that. We'll have to align ourselves with that if we still want to trade with, so we will indirectly come under that animal health law. That is consolidating all the animal health laws in Europe into one single. Currently, we're negotiating with them because they're saying that there will have to be if a horse has been anywhere near another herd or another horse that is not within its same high health status, and thoroughbreds I'm putting in here as high health status, then it would have to go into 30 days quarantine. So if, for example, you do have a teaser or whatever, there's going to be a 30-day quarantine. Now, the majority, and I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but at the moment, the mayors going from, let's say, Newmarket to be covered in Ireland are walk-in mayors. They will leave Newmarket early in the morning, and they'll be back in their box the same time the next day. And they'll be covered in Ireland, they'll come back again. That will just potentially stop. So we're currently in negotiations with the EU, and they also have a problem with the natural cover, which creates another issue. So lots of things, but what electronic passport will do will make that instant. So effectively, once the vet starts that process, rather than lots of papers going around and people handing over papers at the border, that will be pre-cleared. So you'll have it on effectively your passport. Does that answer your question? So it's a very long answer.
No, thank you for that, Simon. If there was, we may take one question over here, if we don't mind. Thanks.
This question's for Elliot and potentially Rolly. You had talked about the no need to bend to the will of the activists, but we need to meet the reasonable person's, opinions. Is the fact that, in particular in Australia, 65% of the population is in an urban center or in capital cities, and we are potentially generationally removing young people from interactions with livestock? And it presents a challenge with that quality of life versus quantity of life conversation to be had around the euthanasia. What are the opportunities that you see going forward to have that conversation with the more urbanized public?
So I think it's number one, acknowledging that things have changed and that there are a different set of values with the millennials and their urban-centric sort of lifestyle. So this is a brand new challenge for racing, and we haven't had to really think about that a great deal in the past, but we're going to have to start changing the ways we do business. So then you start to look at what are the opportunities? Well, of course, we're all very much aware that social media has changed everything in the way that we communicate. And we've got to get better and smarter than doing that than what the activists are, because they are way ahead of us in the way that they engage. And it goes to those type of things such as change.org. If you sign a petition on change.org, you get suggestions. You're interested in caged eggs for and battery hens, or you might be interested in crocodile farming, or you might be interested in jumps racing or greyhound racing. And so there's a real, those sort of algorithms that sit behind those suggestions are being used and exploited by the activists against us. So we need to be doing at least the same and getting better at them than doing it. And then there is, with that comes just a whole acknowledgement from an administration piece that, hey, here's a whole bunch of work and initiatives that we have to start doing that we haven't done before. And unless we start at least something new and get it moving forward, then we're going to keep falling behind. The activist organisations, certainly in Australia, spend millions of dollars every year amongst their various campaigns. And if we're not spending at least that to match it, we are falling behind.
Thank you. No, I think Elliot's absolutely correct here with millennials, with Generation Z. Animal rights, it's not just something that they believe, but it's something that they are including as part of their identity. And once that happens, it's so much harder to change people's perceptions, people's minds. Rolly?
All I'd add, I entirely agree with what Elliot said, but I think it'd be a real mistake to think that doing this is just because of what the activists are doing. When you talk about the social license, that communications piece is really important. But the first part of the social license is we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do by our horses. And so it's actually challenging, when I talk about challenging the status quo, it's about making sure that our house is in order in terms of how we are training, breeding, caring, and retiring our horses. So it's doing the right thing first, and then it's having that conversation as well. We're not doing all of this just because of the activists.
Right. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Diana, did you have?
Almost a very quick one. Simon, when is the e-passport due to come out?
It's being built at the moment, and in fact, we're working with the BHA on the vaccination, which is in a pilot state at the moment, so it's being piloted. And I'm not going to put a date on it because I don't actually know, but we're hopefully going to have it in the first few months of next year. So that's the plan, but I'm looking to Sharon, who's sitting immediately behind you, who knows more about this technical side of it.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you again, Simon. And again, thank you to everybody who attended our IFAR forum here today. I think your attendance here is an acknowledgement that aftercare is vitally important because it's the right thing to do, as Rolly just said, and because it's a big component of the sustainability of our horse racing industry. Again, I'd like to take just one more quick moment to acknowledge a few people here, obviously our speakers and our steering committee. I'd like to thank Alexa Rabbit and Quiva Doherty and Tony Vaughn, who've been at our exhibit booth today and been a big part of making IFAR a success all year round.